I was thinking about this as it was coming down and this report was leaking out. If we were to do a draft, a conservative draft for who you want to write this opinion, my guess is conservatives, look, Clarence Thomas is going to go first overall in almost every one of these drafts like this. But I think the sneaky best pick might actually be Alito.
Totally. Yeah. So Thomas and Alito are by far the two most solid conservatives on the court, obviously. I think reasonable people could disagree. Excuse me. I mean, Clarence Thomas is the most principled originalist. Sam Alito is the most fiery conservative. Whatever the area is, he does not pull any punches. He's probably my personal favorite jurist for that reason alone. That's kind of my cup of tea, obviously. But it's a great opinion. I mean, seriously, congratulations to Justice Alito and his clerks. A
big part of the reasoning here was, look, you can't find abortion in the Constitution either way. I mean, this was horribly argued at the beginning. I believe they said egregiously at the very start. This was wrong from the beginning, and that's kind of how they attacked it. Can you kind of walk people through the actual reasoning as to why they're overturning Roe versus Wade, in theory, if it happens? I'm still on the no chickens until they hatch policy. If it happens, what was the reasoning?
No, and that's the right policy to have. I mean, look, in my role as opinion editor of Newsweek, I have told all my deputy editors that when we talk about this case, when we have pieces that are opining on this, the necessary language hedging should be there in every single piece, under the caveat, on the presumption that the opinion as leaked actually holds, and so forth. So having said that, look, the basic argument against Roe versus Wade is very straightforward. The basic argument is that the so-called right to abortion is nowhere to be found anywhere in the Constitution whatsoever. So the way the constitutional law basically works is, you have structural constitution, we have the separation of powers, Article 1, Article 2, Article 3. And then you have federalism, where both the national government and the states have kind of separate spheres of sovereignty. But because our framers were also scared not just of a monarchy, but they were also scared of kind of the excesses of direct democracy, of mobocracy, of majoritarianism. That's James Madison talking about faction in the Federalist 10 right there. They also put in the system of the Bill of Rights. And, what those Bill of Rights are there for is to take certain rights off the table, where majorities cannot touch them, cannot override them, cannot curtail them. Now, under modern constitutional law doctrine, these rights are incorporated against the states under Section 1 of the 14th Amendment. The traditional vehicle for doing that is the Due Process Clause under a doctrine known as, quote unquote, substantive due process. That itself, it should sound like a bit of an oxymoron, because it is a bit of an oxymoron, as Justice Thomas and Justice Scalia, before he passed away, said time and time again. The clause due process of law says nothing about substance whatsoever. But Roe versus Wade in 1973 used substantive due process to incorporate a right to abortion against the states. It built off a case 8 years prior, Griswold versus Connecticut, which was a case where they first established the so-called right to privacy. It was from the penumbras of the emanations, the Bill of Rights. I mean, they weren't even hiding it. They basically were saying, we know it's in there. Don't worry about a precise textual citation for it. We're just telling you it's in there because we're lawyers, we're smart, whatever. Then they took that, and 8 years later, they turned that right to privacy into a right to abort your unborn child. So the actual constitutional law underpinning of Roe versus Wade is famously awful. I mean, it just simply does not rest on firm footing. As John Hart Eli, the personally liberal, personally pro-abortion former Harvard law professor, famously once said, despite that, he famously said, Roe versus Wade is not constitutional law, and it gives no semblance of purporting to be constitutional law. So that's basically what Sam Alito says. He takes through all the arguments, and he was just like, this is not there. It is not a right. Therefore, under the 10th Amendment, it is an issue for the states.
It does seem to be a really strong shoot down, basically, smackdown, I guess I'm looking for, of Roe versus Wade, which is what, the sensible thought has demanded for a very long time. When we look at the actual breakdown of the court, we have 5 conservatives and this is, I think, all dependent on the reporting, right, from Politico. We believe 5 of the conservatives are on board with this. 3 liberals are against. And then John Roberts is seemingly undecided. What do we think that means? Is he trying to forge some third way? What is going on here?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what he's trying to do, right? So the Wall Street Journal actually had an editorial under the Review and Outlook, the Journal signed editorials. Basically, last week, it was roughly 1 week ago, where they said exactly that they were relying on sources. So, by the way, my reading of the Journal's editorial actually was that there was a separate leak. So my reading of the situation is that this is actually a very leaky court in general, which is no bueno. I mean, that's a very, very, very bad thing for all sorts of reasons. But I think the chief pretty clearly is trying to find a middle ground position. If you go back to the Dobbs oral argument from December 1st, his questions to the state of Mississippi, to counsel, basically suggested, he was like, counsel, help me through here. You know, can we do X, but not actually go all the way to Y? In real time, he was trying to kind of think that out. So I have no doubt that the chief has been trying to kind of pull over Kavanaugh or Barrett, because when you don't have a 5-justice majority, even if you have a 4-justice plurality to overturn Roe or Casey, put another way, if either Barrett or Kavanaugh defect, if one of them defects and joins the chief in that kind of 4-2-3 bizarre split that I was talking about earlier, then at that point it's the controlling opinion. It would be the 2-justice opinion that could find a way to uphold Mississippi but not actually overturn Roe. So this is who John Roberts is. Obviously, he is an incrementalist. He's always trying to move the ball forward in the narrowest way possible. Obviously motivated by a host of different factors outside of the Constitution and jurisprudence. He's motivated by the institutional integrity of the court and all this ridiculous stuff that he really should not be concerned about, because he didn't take an oath of office to do that. Right. Took an oath of office to uphold the Constitution. But I have no doubt that that's what he's trying to do.
It's not your job, John. That's not your job. You might want that to be your job, but that's not your job. Understand the Constitution and rule on what you believe is constitutional. So talk to me a little bit about, Josh, about the idea that the left keeps bringing up, which is this is settled law. You know, this has been 50 years. It's been there for 50 years. We can't overturn it. This is crazy. There are other examples, and Alito spends some time going through them here, of the country doing this. When something is wrong, we're supposed to get it right. Isn't that the concept?
Yeah, of course, that's the concept, Stu. I mean, look, at oral argument, this came up. I mean, are the people who are so pro stare decisis, who are allegedly so pro precedent, I mean, did they want Plessy versus Ferguson to be overturned? Did they want the Korematsu decision with respect to Japanese internment during World War II? Did they want those cases to be overturned? You know, I think if they're being even slightly intellectually honest, of course they would answer yes. But the fundamental question here, to get back to what I was saying on the last segment with Roberts and his extracurricular concerns, the fundamental question is, what do you have an oath to do? So, I would direct your listeners. I wrote like a long, 5,000-word essay for National Affairs Journal about a year and a half ago entitled Overrule Stare Decisis. I thought I was trying to be clever with the title, obviously. But the basic argument here is that the justices, again, take an oath to the Constitution. Their oath is to the Constitution and the statutes and treaties that are passed pursuant to the Constitution. Their oath is not to a 5-member majority of the Supreme Court, no matter how they interpret it. That's simply not how it works. Look, even under a slightly less doctrinaire view of stare decisis, there were traditional stare decisis factors. How workable the precedent was, what would be the consequences of overturning. Well, look, Roe and Casey proved to be worse than unworkable. They purported to kind of end the abortion dispute, but anyone with even a cursory level observation of what has happened in America over the past 30 years since Casey and the past 49 years since Roe is that tensions have been totally inflamed. This is still like our great roiling moral controversy. So they have not even come close to being successful on their own self-avowed terms. So even under the more traditional kind of list of stare decisis factors, it has failed on its own terms. But Alito, really interestingly, in his opinion, as you alluded to, Stu, he has what lawyers would call a string cite, this like very long cite after cite after cite after cite, where he's just showing liberals how oftentimes overruling precedent has actually redounded to liberals' interest, because the policies that were overruled there ended up helping liberals, or at least they liked the policies. So it's very clever, and again, it's just a very strong opinion by a very strong conservative jurist, Sam Alito.
Yeah, and it's such a ridiculous standard. I mean, they constantly complain about something like Citizens United and want it overturned. It's just, right. I mean, it's obviously they're just using it for their own purposes. It's not a real point at this juncture, at least. Let me get to the leak a little bit here, because this is, I think, a fascinating part of this. Because my take on it immediately was, look, this is clearly somebody on the left, I think, a clerk or one of the justices themselves, probably Sotomayor if it was that way, leaking this to put pressure on Kavanaugh, on Barrett, to try to get them to flip. A Hail Mary, a last-second hope to put pressure on them, to put pressure on their families, to make them scared, to God only knows what else. It's an effort to try to get one of them to flip before this decision comes out. Is that the right way to think about it? Is that what you think it is?
So that is my best guess. I mean, again, there's really no way of knowing for sure. In a situation like this, where there are so many moving parts, I tend to err on the side of Occam's razor. I mean, the simplest, most straightforward explanation is probably going to be the correct explanation. If you go back to the Dobbs oral argument, and you listen to what the justices were asking, Sonia Sotomayor really sounded a heck of a lot like a Democratic National Committee or MSNBC talking head partisan hack. I mean, the questions that she was asking were laughable. I mean, she was literally asking questions, Stu, that, like a drunk 19-year-old in the college dorms had a few too many would be like, oh, how do we know when human life begins? I mean, this is a sophomoric way of approaching the abortion dispute, obviously. So my best guess is that a clerk in her chambers probably went rogue, but it would not surprise me if she actually signed off on this. And the way to think about that is you have to understand, not you, I know you understand, but like the listeners, viewers, abortion is their thing. They love this issue. The precise phrase that I've used over and over again over the years is it's their foremost pagan sacrament. I mean, it is what they live for. As a Sixth Circuit judge, Amul Thapar wrote in a very good opinion from either late last September or early October, can't quite remember, he said there are two sets of rules. I'm paraphrasing here. Basically, there are two sets of rules as pertains to constitutional litigation in the courts. There are the rules for all cases, and then there are the separate rules for abortion. I've called this abortion exceptionalism. All the various rules and procedures get thrown out the book on the left's favorite issue. And a good example of that, historically speaking, would be kind of the so-called viability standard that Planned Parenthood versus Casey came up with. There was no analog to that. It's completely made up. It is only an abortion. There's no other constitutional law area where that is the specific standard. And obviously what happened here with respect to this literally unprecedented leak, nothing like this has ever happened before, ever. All the rules were clearly just totally thrown out of the book this time as well.
And it's because this is their thing. It's their issue. It's what they build this entire philosophy on. And let me end there, because you've been great on all these the details here as a legal expert and everything that you're able to analyze that I don't understand. But like fundamentally, why, Josh? Why would your thing be not wanting children to be born? I mean, I understand it's a little maybe more complicated than that, but like I can understand when we have a disagreement about minimum wage. I mean, I don't agree with their side of that argument, but like I can understand it. I can understand why they want higher taxes on rich people. I don't agree with it, but I can see. I don't understand why you would have so much passion to make sure children are not born. Why is it their thing?
Stu, it's a great question. It's a question I've asked myself many times over the years, obviously. The best I can do is try to answer, because I'm not a leftist. I don't think like this. I don't particularly know. The most obvious answer is that they really just want carefree sex, right? I mean, that has to be the answer, right? I mean, they want this culture that's kind of pervaded ever since 1960s, with obviously the adoption of the pill, Plan B, things of that nature. They want this culture where you can just go around, the hookup culture on universities. I mean, I graduated college only 11 years ago, so it's not like I didn't see all this myself. They just want this culture of just being able to have like flings and romantic pursuits and just simply not worry about the consequences. I think they've deluded themselves into thinking of abortion as a form of contraception. Like, to them, they have literally kind of adopted, I think, hook, line, and sinker, the idea that, if a condom breaks or like the abortifacient doesn't work or whatever, whatever the woman is taking as far as a birth control, that the abortion at the end is there to kind of kick in and take care of what needs to be done. It's disgusting, because it literally is ignoring, obviously, what Stephen Douglas famously ignored in his 1858 debates with Abraham Lincoln, which is the humanity of the separate lives involved. For Stephen Douglas, of course, that was the humanity of Black people, of slaves in the Western territories. And obviously here, that is the humanity of the unborn child. Look, thankfully, since Roe versus Wade was written 49 years ago, the state of neonatal science, of prenatal science, I should say, has really advanced to the point where we do not doubt the authenticity of the humanity of the unborn child. We know that that is the case. In fact, Harry Blackman, the author of Roe versus Wade himself, actually had language in that opinion where he expressly said that this holding today, basically, it is contingent upon the current state of medical science, and we are open to the idea that this holding might need to change if the medical science actually advances. Well, it has. We have much better technology these days, and we know beyond a doubt that there was a unique DNA code from the moment of conception. That is a life, period.
Well, there we go. This is a big one. And again, I am not counting any chickens before they hatch. All the disclaimers apply. But if this happens, this is a day I never saw coming. I did not think I'd ever see this day. It will be amazing if it actually does happen. Josh Hammer, opinion editor for Newsweek and host of the Josh Hammer Show. Josh, thanks so much for coming on and explaining this to all of us. I appreciate it.
You bet, Stu. Take care.
If you enjoyed this video, hit like and subscribe to our channel so you'll be sure to see similar videos from Blaze TV with the added bonus of signaling YouTube that your voice and opinion still matters. And if you're looking for more great conservative content, check out one of the 2 videos suggested here.